that's kind of where I wanted to stop today, and we'll jump into some new stuff next week. But I wanted to at least lay that all out there and see how that's impacting you. What do you need? Let me ask this question: what would you need to know to teach that what we just went over? What would you need to understand better to hand this to someone else? We're going to apply church planning movement principles here. Who are you going to share that with this week? We need to do things, all things with order. So it's not all.
This is an interactive time.
Yep.
I think like a clear and concise like pain point that people who are not in the midst of like intense marital conflict, like, hey, this is the like, pain that gaining this skill really addresses, that says, oh man, I really want that because I could see. And so, and I know it was thrown in there a bunch, but something really concise.
Good. Well, theologically, whenever our relational needs are not met, whenever our needs are not met, not theologically, philosophically, in this ministry, the pinch point is experiencing aloneness. We want to connect, we want to be known, we want to be cared for, and we're just getting missed. And oftentimes we don't have any tools or resources or understanding how to move forward from that. I just feel disconnected. So that idea is the answer to aloneness is the skill of building connection and relationship. So that'd be my quick response to that. So we have the reality of the fall, and we experience fallenness, and that's answered in the gospel, that we possess the righteousness of Christ, but the aloneness piece remains, where relationships are still pretty significant to bring that health and life to us. That may come out in some of the other stuff as well, then in terms of a well-defined pinch point, and I'm open to other ideas. Do you have something, Nathan?
I was just going to share maybe one that I think of when you say kind of the potential pain. Kind of this idea that we've used before is, would you rather be setting up a sign in front of a cliff that says, danger, look out for cliff? Or would you rather be running an ambulance service on the other side of the cliff where everybody's falling off and trying to mend them? Sometimes they're not mendable. And so part of what we're trying to do with this class is present a really big sign that unless you start to become connected, both with the Lord and with your spouse or whoever you're with, there's going to be a cliff incident of some kind that hopefully after that cliff you'd still be repairable, but sometimes it's pretty tragic to see. And so a lot of this is a warning and an encouragement that the pain you're avoiding would be the pain of regret. I wish all those years in which things were going somewhat decently, I had been sowing to these ideas so that when this really hard thing came, I was equipped and I didn't go over the cliff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a fundamental paradigm that's been important for me is to recognize that this is the gospel. If in our minds we say, well, the gospel resolves this, but then we still have our needs for relationship, we still have our aloneness needs, we've just defined the gospel as separate from this, which means that for all of us, it should be very secondary, because the only thing that's really primary is the gospel. But if it's true, as Pat's been sharing, that what God is about is connection, if that's what exists in the Trinity, if that's what we're called into, then then if we don't see this as a fundamental experiencing of the gospel, I think we got the wrong definition of the gospel. And that, I think, could be part of what's wrong fundamentally with evangelical America. That they think that the gospel is about this legal exchange of Christ's righteousness for our righteousness, and that the relational stuff is sort of this nice stuff on the side that feels really good if you can get it right, but it's really not that critical. You just need to understand this legal communication. And that's why we end up with all the people at the bottom of the cliff, because they're not grabbing this reality dimension of the gospel, which is more than knowledge. It's like Pat shared, it's a skill, it's a life. The Christianity was called the way. The way. Isn't the way an expression of the gospel? It's a way of life that is totally different than the world around us, and it's primarily relational. And I think I appreciate that more and more as I watch Christians that have been believers for years and years with incredible Bible knowledge and deep, deep convictions hit things that they cannot navigate. What is it we are not giving them when we would all look at one another and say we are fully, wholeheartedly committed believers, and yet we can't navigate this? Well, what we can't navigate is almost always relational stuff. And I think that means we're fundamentally leaving something out of our comprehensive understanding of what we have in Christ. And so then if I can look at my church and go, wow, there's this fundamental dimension of the gospel that needs to be broadened in people's understanding, then I can go, this is important. It's not this nice side thing that, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could add this module to my church? This is supposed to be a part of the center, I think. And this is the part we enjoy. This is what makes it fun. When this isn't there, it's either boring or bad. If this is there, it's life-giving.
Yeah, thoughts, John? The other book that I threw in there, the Great Commandment Principle, it also exists out there as the Never Alone Church. That is a look at how relational need, relational care, relational theology can fit into body life. So it's not looking at primarily marriage. So both of those books are more looking at the high level call to make sure it's present in all of church life. And so if you're wondering what would that look like if we did try to massage that into more of a center of how we do life and ministry together, the Great Commandment Principle has some pretty good anecdotes and pictures of that as well. So.
One response for me is when you talked about patterns, and I think you specified anger, but talking about how there's patterns that people bring in to, and I know this isn't specifically to marriage, or it's not only about marriage, but bring into marriage, particularly from before. And I'm not married, and I'm in a whole accountability group with some guys, some of whom are not married, and so that's kind of where my mind goes, is for someone who might not think as a single person that all this deep relationship stuff isn't necessary for me, as a marriage preparation tool, but also church relationship tool, being a necessary thing for that, even if you're not a married person.
So Cole, you're saying it's necessary or it's unnecessary for that in that context, or feels unnecessary? I
think the temptation. This almost goes back to Nathan's question too of what's difficult, and for me with some single dudes, it's like probably not. It doesn't feel necessary, but I'm saying it is, and what. So that's what I'm kind of responding to your question of who's this something you could share with. Who's someone you could share these kinds of things with, and that's where my mind goes, is guys who might not think it's necessary for them because they're not married.
Yeah, and hopefully, thank you for that feedback. I do think that can be one of the challenges. I share basically how I would teach all of this for married people versus single dudes, I would change about 10 words or 10 examples, maybe not even 10 examples, because it's fundamentally the same things that God has called us to. And we won't go into all of that today, but I think over the next couple of weeks, you'll hopefully be able to begin to see how, oh, this is different than I just really long for deep, meaningful relationships. And that's where the conviction comes in. Because if God doesn't command it or want it, then we're just having a discussion here about potentially cool things. But if this is his goal, well, then it becomes germane to everyone. It becomes significant to everyone to figure out what that looks like. But I can certainly appreciate the pinch point for single dudes probably is not the same as the husband whose wife keeps giving the cold shoulder because he doesn't understand relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I think, I mean, I lived in single guys' households for years and years before I got married, and guys can just sort of hang out and do whatever, ride bikes together, or do little, little sports, whatever, together, and it all seems really easy. But as soon as you come together in some kind of a relational unit, like a household or a small group, and you're coming together to accomplish what God wants, I always experienced, wow, relational stuff just comes up right away. People are frustrated, people are critical, people are jealous, people are, there's all this stuff that rolls around that's got to be addressed. And so I think even in that single context, even with single males, when they're the place where God's called them into, I think they do experience a real need, a felt need, if they're honest, for these relational skills.
Yeah.
A verse in that book, The Other Side of Church, that makes this connection. And maybe, Pat, in your next episode, you'll build on this. But for me, feedback would be, man, I would just put one verse up there that just makes it so crystal clear that the body of Christ needs to mature. And the verse that the book uses, and my missional community with Cole just went through Ephesians, is in Ephesians 3, to present and be a mature man is the word it uses there, but a mature into maturity. And so then to your slides, which you did a great job of, and I really appreciate them. They look great. Good job. Is okay, well, how do you mature? And that's what the other side of church gets at, right? Well, there are a few ways to do that. And one of the ways is just dialectic, but another way is dialogue. And so that kind of verse for me would ground it. I could take it all across our MCs and then the connections there. But it's just as far as today, just not having that one verse, and rather the idea, which I heard you share many times, the idea of, hey, God cares about this, I think would set that up.
It's a good verse. Good thought.
Yep. Cool. Thanks.
And Cole, just a quick story with a guy that I was in close relationship with back in the day. He was a trained mixed martial artist and jiu-jitsu, and could probably beat me up in faster time than I knew what was happening to me. And working with him in some of these relational things, he just completely opened up and hit his heart. And so even the most, gritty, tough, I'm fierce kind of guys, I've discovered as soon as you start to say, yeah, it seems like you just really would love to have your need for acceptance, met. As soon as there's this trust in this relationship, that I found it's like, oh yeah, that's totally it. And so able to speak relational, caring, connecting ways with other men. But I agree with you. It doesn't come naturally, because I think as men, we've somewhat been patterned maybe to think that relational stuff is just for women, or it just was never shown to us, or there's all sorts of reasons why probably. But for sure, it's a need among men, both single and married.
Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, I think one of the maybe challenges in communicating this is that intersection between God meeting our needs and God meeting our needs through people, and that I find, I don't know, I have a general understanding that God, the way that generally God shows us love through other people generally. And God has even called us to be ambassadors of his love, and and that generally God meets people's needs through people, but it's still from God. But I think being like, maybe there's a little breakdown in being able to communicate that to others, as far as God's supposed to give me everything. I don't need people. And to say, no, you do need people, because God is going to meet your needs through people. Anyways, I find that's one of the challenging places for me, as far as this foundation of communication. Like, am I bypassing God and just getting my needs from fallen people, and kind of, I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense.
That's good. Yeah, and by the way, I know this is it seems like a long introduction, but we haven't started any content yet. This is simply saying where we're going, why we're going there, and how we're going to attack it. That's all we've covered. We will hopefully dive into more of those deeper questions of what well, is that really God's design? And that'd be the question that always, I appreciate it on John's slide on his gender teaching. He found it the other day, was we were going to teach through some of that at our gathering. The idea, if you want to know how something is supposed to work, consult the designer. Don't consult those who are trying to use it, whether they may understand it, but they may not. Always go back to the designer. And so I've been actually talking with a really brilliant engineer type that's in the mission field, and he coined that for me. It's God's original design. And so that's really what we're on the hunt for. What did God intend? How did he want this to work? How did he make us? And if we can find that groove, then the way he made us to need care, and our capacity to care for one another, becomes a pretty significant discovery of, is that our expectation that God's going to meet our needs, or was that God's design? So keep asking those kind of questions as you're reflecting on these things. Okay, anything else burned on your mind?
I just reemphasize what John was saying, going all the way back to when I first got involved in this movement. You know, one of my first disciplers was in high school and was with, oh man, some high school ministry. I'm forgetting the name of it. And I really wanted to find a church that was living on mission. I really thought, oh man, I can't just do youth group. I got to find a church that's living on mission. And one of the first things at Ball State with our little church right there was, okay, you want to live on mission, but how well do you live transparently? And I don't know if that's a language that maybe we've lost, but I've been using it. We got 6 interns here this summer, and I just kind of was using that this morning with them. Was just like, hey, what does it mean to not have to be asked, but to kind of bring yourself to the table, you know? And that, I would say, was early on, you know, way back in the 1990s, before broken pelvises and hip pain, and that's why I'm laying down. So thank you for being patient with me. But you know, it's like, man, all of our small groups had such an emphasis on, you know, keeping short accounts, living in transparency. And as we've mentioned here, it triggered all kinds of things. And one of the things I've been praying for that I could get back to is we had 2 people on our staff there back at Ball State that were counselors and marriage family therapists, and they just flowed in the life of the church, ministry, discipleship. I mean, they were so mission and discipleship focused, but they did it from a place of wholeness and unity, relational care. And especially here in the city, something that's so overwhelming for me is just thinking about the number of households, families that are fatherless, and just the issues of fatherlessness. And I find that what we're talking about here, Pat, is really helping people be fathered again. And I've actually used that word as that may be the most important word in the human language. I could talk about that later, though.
I'll be there for that training.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, appreciate you guys slugging out. We'll, if you have anything you want to talk about, something comes up, question, dialogue, even for next time, please let me know as we roll forward here. I did put it on repeat, so the link should show up. You accept the invitation, should show up in your calendar. So anyway, it's good to see all your faces. Appreciate you investing the time, and we'll get back together in a week or so. All right.
And you're going to send out the Google Drive resource stuff?
Yeah, I'll keep funneling stuff out to you so you can be looking at things.
Sounds good.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Pat.